Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Game Esoteric, and we're continuing this series, Who's Nintendo Suing or Screwing this week? And of course you knew I was going to be talking about the most recent round of Nintendo DMCA takedown requests to GitHub for different Nintendo Switch emulation repositories. I just waited a few days for the dust to settle and all of the information basically to be available so I could more intelligently and factually talk about what's going on here. And honestly, this isn't a surprise whatsoever. Nintendo's always popping up and trying to play whack-a-mole with these emulation developers, but honestly, they've been basically poking at things for so long now, video game ROMs, things like that. It really isn't all that surprising that we're seeing their name again. And I'm here to tell you basically at this point in time, it doesn't really matter what Nintendo does whatsoever, trying to take down games, trying to take down emulators. We all know this is the internet, everything is forever, and nothing will ever go away. So where does this end for Nintendo? They're just going to keep doing it. Repos are going to keep disappearing, they're going to keep popping up in other places, and basically it's going to be like a dog chasing its own tail. Even when it catches the tail, it's probably going to realize that it's not a good idea, and it's going to stop for a bit, and then make that chase all over again. But it is interesting. This has been something we've been talking about basically since early 2004. We're now in 2006, almost 2 years now, that Nintendo has been keeping up with all of these different lawsuits and all of these different takedown requests for Nintendo Switch emulation. And the one thing we can unequivocally say the result of that has been is that Switch emulation just keeps getting better and better. It keeps getting updated even if the main Switch emulator from 2024, Yuzu, is not being developed by that team anymore. All of these different forks continue to improve on Nintendo emulation, and that's going to be what happens in the future, because Nintendo can fight against this all they want. They can try to bother people, but nothing really is going to change. And we've seen this basically across the last 24 months. Like every 3 or 4 months, Nintendo pops up and DMCA something or threatens to sue somebody. And the reality is, again, that hasn't stopped anything whatsoever, because they can continue to make the argument about emulation being illegal. And we'll get into that later on in the video as to why their claims basically don't hold merit whatsoever. But I understand that when you see these headlines, they can definitely be making it sound like that Nintendo Switch emulation is dead in the water and it's not going to exist anymore. But unfortunately, there are some downsides to this most recent DMCA takedown request that they have sent over to GitHub, and we'll get into those in just a bit. But what they really want is for you to think that it isn't correct to use this. They want it to be hard to find, so that basically you think to yourself, you know what, it really isn't worth it whatsoever. We should just probably go out and pay $70 for a game that Nintendo released 2 generations ago. And the reality is, at least for me personally, when I use Nintendo Switch emulation, I am using it for games I own. I know that might make me a little bit weird, but when I put a game into my Nintendo Switch or Switch 2 and it doesn't run at a great frame rate, and I move over to emulation, I have 4K textures and 60 frames per second on my OLED. I've purchased the game, I've purchased the hardware, so I will decide to play it however I please. But you'll see here 12 different repositories have gotten DMCA takedown requests, and Nintendo's still leaning on the fact that they are calling this illegal emulation. And the reality situation is Nintendo can continue to call this illegal, but there is no court case that determines it in their favor that this is not allowed. If that actually existed, they wouldn't be doing DMCA takedown requests, they'd be suing every single emulation developer out there. The only reason they went after Yuzu was because they were doing stupid things outside of actually writing emulation software. And the best court case we have, which I've discussed on the channel before, is Sony Computer Entertainment versus CANT or Bleem. And it is one of those things. Until this is decided in a court of law and a precedent is set, Nintendo can continue to say that this is a legal circumvention and that it is not permissible, but they actually don't have a factual basis for that. They are just saying their opinion. But Nintendo is of the school of thought that if they just keep saying their opinion authoritatively to different news outlets, that somehow that will actually become fact and law. They're just basically making it seem so scary, at least the average user, they think to themselves it isn't even worth trying. But the reality is the average video game player that owns a Switch or Switch 2 isn't going to be emulating these things in the first place. They just buy the games, put them in the handheld, and start playing. And it really makes you wonder exactly what Nintendo's end goal is here, because the people that understand how emulation works, the people that use it, know full well that within like a 30-second Google search, you're going to be able to find all of the things that these DMCA takedown requests remove from GitHub. It is the internet again, and nothing is ever removed whatsoever. And I just don't understand exactly what Nintendo's main focus is here. I really feel like this has a Streisand effect, where more people read about Switch emulation in the news and think to themselves, hey, I didn't actually know that was a crazy thing, I should go look for it. Because trust me, the average viewer of this channel knows a hell of a lot more than the average person that's reading a video game news website. That is not a knock against that. I'm just saying, you know that emulation exists. I know that it exists, but some people out there really don't understand the concept of it. But the nice thing is you will see at least some development groups are saying that we're just going to continue because we don't think we're doing anything wrong. Now, of course, that is a risk, but it's a risk that I absolutely support because, again, until there's a court case that says you can't do something like this, Nintendo is just trying to flex their legal muscle and use their absolutely infinite coin purse to be able to make a reality that they want, even if there isn't any basis for that. And they've definitely gone full court press on stuff like this as well, because again, we haven't seen many examples of it, but there are instances of Nintendo basically bricking Switch 2 consoles if you use the wrong software on them. And even though that is the right, they did sell the hardware to you, and it's one of those things, they can block you from online support. That isn't something that you're quote unquote buying when you buy the console. It really just goes to show just how consumer unfriendly Nintendo has become in the last like 10 years or so. I mean, they've always been a little bit consumer unfriendly, but now they just have a full court press, because every time Nintendo feels any sort of success whatsoever in the market, they go absolutely hog wild when it comes to suing people and just trying to flex their way around. And that's why basically they use these DMCA takedown requests and don't really go to courts, because it's as likely that they would lose on their argument as they would win if they brought a clean case against an emulation developer who was only developing emulation and doing nothing else around the edges like the Yuzu team was. Unfortunately, the Yuzu team was doing things that definitely were not permissible, and that's how Nintendo got that settlement very quickly, and that's how they got that statement, at least in the courts, where the developers of Yuzu said they were doing something that wasn't allowed. But a statement in a settlement is not legally binding, so honestly, Nintendo can kind of go pound sand with that one. But it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the future, because again, some people will just walk away from the development things themselves. It's just way too much of a hassle to deal with, not trusting what Nintendo is going to do in the future, and I could totally understand that. But I also respect the emulation developers out there that are just saying what we are doing we believe is correct, and we're going to continue to go ahead and do that. But it's not like some of these things haven't actually disappeared. Two different Switch emulation developers have basically stated that they are no longer continuing the development of Switch emulation, but that has nothing to do with the DMCA. I think that's something that's been a little bit of a misnomer, especially when people actually send me messages on Discord or Twitter and ask about it. One emulation developer team basically just said it wasn't worth working on anymore, and the other team had some internal issues, which seems to happen almost all the time. But something like Eden, they basically say they're unfazed by this, and they're going to continue with the developments. Now, unfortunately, on the RetroDeck side of things, they have completely determined to remove all Switch emulation from RetroDeck distribution, and it's one of those things. This is what Nintendo wants. Now, I'm not quote-unquote judging the RetroDeck team for doing this. I can understand as a sort of legal basis why you basically wouldn't want to pull on the tiger's tail on this one, but the unfortunate part is the things that they are saying here. This is exactly how Nintendo wins, even if they haven't won anything. Having an entire distribution removed from an emulation front end for something like Steam Deck, whether it's EmuDeck or RetroDeck in this instance, and then them saying basically within their actual rules now that talking about Switch emulation will no longer be permitted on any social media platform effective immediately. That's just what Nintendo wants. This is how Nintendo wins. Developers and teams making rules that you can't even talk about something anymore. Because trust me, talking about emulation in no way, shape, or form is going to be an issue, but people get overly cautious, then suddenly an entire topic is no longer allowed to be discussed, and that's just a bummer. But it's absolutely a net win for Nintendo, and that's why they continue to do stuff like send out these rounds of DMCA takedown requests. And you will see here, at least on the Citron side of things, that is also ceasing development, but that seems to be completely an internal dispute between developers. And I understand there's a lot of different personalities in the games here as far as development is concerned, but this is something that always bums me out, and we see more often than not in some sort of emulation communities where basically the developers just get at each other's throats and continue to argue and fight until everybody walks away, takes their ball home, and says, "I'm not playing anymore." But that's something that's been happening for basically decades now, and it's something that isn't going to change in the future. So as far as Nintendo sending all these DMCA takedown requests to GitHub for Switch emulation, it's not really going to affect anything. Teams are still continuing. Nintendo isn't bringing court cases because they know it is a risk that they'll be proven wrong in court and have no legal recourse in the future. So if you want to emulate Nintendo Switch, they are still out there. They are a Google away. This really isn't anything that's going to be terrifying for the future. Emulation does exist, it will continue to exist, and it will never be stopped. But short of that, we're done. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.